Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to our weekly webinar. This week's topic we will be discussing GDPR and what it means for your business when hiring. So in particular, we'll be really focusing on how GDPR, which is obviously the hot topic at the minute, it's one everybody's potentially worried about or just getting ready for. At Landed, we don't like to worry about it. We're just putting steps in place to make sure that we are compliant. And I think if you know what to look for and you know what pitfalls there are out there and what steps you can take, then nobody should really be worried about these new changes coming in. It obviously does mean a little bit more work, and I think there's been a lot of focus on what GDPR impacts on in terms of holding information and data with regards to marketing. There has potentially been less focus on what this means for HR teams and recruitment teams in particular, and how we hold that information. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. I will cover some of the main sort of points. Some of it will sound fairly legislative. Data protection is not an exciting and interesting topic, but we will try to keep it as engaging for you as possible. If you have any sessions or questions, at the end, then by all means feel free to ask me, and I'll be more than happy to answer any queries that you have. Or if you want to email me, my contact details will be available at the end. So, moving forward, just to give you a bit of background as to who I am. My name is Emma Ganesh. I am the co-founder and CEO of Landed Recruiting Software. We're an organisation based here in Northern Ireland with clients across the UK, Ireland, and now stretching into the United States as well. And what we focus on particularly is making recruitment easy for companies. So we're very much focused on providing corporate solutions to ensure that companies, whether they have HR teams, recruitment teams, or whether they don't, can engage and attract the best talent to their teams. Today's presentation has been prepared by Michael Green, who is our chartered accountant within the business, and he is a certified GDPR practitioner. So any of the legislative guidelines, Michael is fully qualified in respect to those, and he's provided all the information and data for me. And Michael has trained us up and given us the information that we need to know, but he is our specialist and he's our go-to person. So if there's any questions I can't ask, you can email michaelg@wearelanded.com, and he'll be more than happy to answer any queries you've got about GDPR and how that relates to holding personal data. So what I'm going to run through in today's session, which should hopefully last about half an hour, I've given you an introduction to Landed and who we are. We'll cover the topic of what is GDPR, how GDPR differs from Data Protection Act, accountability and governance concepts, consent, privacy notices, cookies, breach reporting and sanctions, summary, and then at the end there'll be a very quick area on how Landed can actually help you, and then open the floor to questions if you have any. So Landed, just to give you a bit of a background and in more detail, is we're a recruitment marketing software. So we're not your standard ATS, we're a recruitment marketing software helping companies reach more, engage more, and hire more. What we want to do is revolutionise the sector, but I'm not going to go into that in too much detail today. I promise this not to be a sales pitch. More importantly, what we want to focus on is GDPR. And I think there is still a bit of a grey area in respect to what that actually is. So the General Data Protection Regulation will come into effect from the 25th of May this year. And the DPA, which was the Data Protection Act, was a directive, whereas the GDPR is a regulation. So whereas we didn't have to obey the rules of data protection, and it was a guideline that most companies had sort of aspired to, and said that they had good data protection processes in place, GDPR is a regulation, which means all member states within the EU have to implement it. And GDPR applies to data controllers and processors. The definitions are broadly the same as under the Data Protection Act. And if you're currently subject to DPA, it's likely that you'll be subject to GDPR. The regulation places specific legal obligations on data processors, for example, if you're required to maintain records for personal data and processing activities. So you will have significantly more legal liability if you're responsible for any breach. Data controllers will have additional responsibilities to ensure that their processes and contracts comply with GDPR regulations. The regulation applies to personal data, which is any data that can identify a living individual, and it does not apply to businesses, to business data, for example, business accounts. So it's personal data. So it's something that can, as I say, be identifiable to a living individual, and that is very obviously prominent within recruitment and how people hold data. So it's CVs, personal records of employees, bank details, references, anything that has personal information that can identify an individual. The essence of legislation is to safeguard the rights of EU citizens, to put control back in the hands of the data subject, forcing businesses to take a proactive approach to data protection. The UK government has confirmed that legislation will not be affected by the decision to leave the EU. It has already been passed into EU law, and the May 2018 deadline for implementation by all member states stands with the UK. So it applies to the processing of data, of personal data of all EU citizens, regardless of whether the organisation is located in the EU or not. So even, for example, if the situation changes and Brexit happens, and then in 5-6 years' time the government repeal this regulation, we will still have to comply to GDPR guidelines if we are processing data of other EU citizens. So, for example, here in Northern Ireland, we would process a lot of data from citizens in the Republic of Ireland, which is still a member of the EU. But even still, for now, we are still within the EU, and even in the transition period, and after that, we are bound to those guidelines. So it's very important that companies take this seriously and don't just use Brexit as an excuse to ignore it. The two key areas of GDPR are accountability and data governance. Controllers and processors are required to implement the regulation and demonstrate that they do so. Demonstrate being the key point. Businesses must put systems in place to ensure that they can prove compliance. This requires management to buy in a top-down approach and adequate processes to maintain and monitor compliance. The definition of personal data has remained largely the same, but has been expanded under GDPR to include data such as online identifiers, e.g. IP addresses or cookies, and these are now classed as personal data as well, as they can identify an individual. Sensitive personal data classed as special categories of data include genetic data, biometric data, or data concerning health, and GDPR requires explicit consent for processing such data. Companies processing large volumes of special category data should also appoint a data protection officer. GDPR applies to both automated personal data and manual filing systems. So if your filing cabinet is full of candidate records, past and present, and employee personnel files, they are covered under the regulation, and appropriate safeguards need to be put in place around manual filing systems to avoid data breaches. Data subjects have additional rights under GDPR in respect of how their data is handled, and specifically the right to port their data and the right to be forgotten. For example, if I decide to move dentist, I have the right for my data and dental records to be transferred to my new dentist without undue delay. In the case of recruitment process, if I no longer wish for a company to process my data and withdraw from a process, I have the right to request full deletion of my applicant record and all associated data, subject to any restrictions in respect to governing laws, etc. Consent will be harder to obtain and harder to rely on, so companies need to put tracking mechanisms in place to ensure that they can both gather consent efficiently and maintain it. We will go further into detail on how you can manage consent shortly. An emphasis has been placed on transparency. Companies need to update their privacy statements to be concise, clear, and unambiguous. They should standardise and be auditable, and you should ensure that you keep a log of changes to any privacy statements you have and put in process a place to track the policies that were in place when an individual provided their data to you. Profiling is specifically mentioned in GDPR, and any automated decision-making must be notified to an individual. Data subjects have the right to request human intervention, and we will touch upon how that affects recruitment marketing activities and automated selection later. The penalties for breach of GDPR are extremely onerous and have the potential to cripple a small business. Fines up to €200 million or 4% of global annual turnover can be imposed. The ICO is the regulatory body in the UK responsible for ensuring GDPR is adhered to. And data transfers to non-EU countries are specifically mentioned in GDPR, and authorities have issued a whitelist of countries which are deemed to have adequate protection controls. It is important to note that the USA is not on that list. So if you are processing data and dealing with companies or sending data of your employees to the USA on secondments, etc., it's important to stress that they must have the same data protection rules. And if you're looking to send them out to other departments or other areas within your organisation. The new EU-US Privacy Shield replaces Safe Harbour, and you should ensure that any US-based processes are self-certified under the Privacy Shield. So if you are working with the USA, it's important to look about how you can guarantee that you're still complying with the regulations. Article 5 in GDPR sets out the principle in relation to processing personal data and legislates for the concept of accountability. Processed lawful, fairly and in a transparent manner. Data must be collected for specific, explicit and legitimate purposes only. It must be adequate, relevant and limited to what is necessary. Accurate and where necessary kept up to date, and retained only for as long as necessary, and processed in an appropriate manner to maintain security. Sorry, jumped ahead of myself there. So the bottom line is a business needs to shift the focus to be proactive in the approach to data protection. And you must really take steps to ensure that any data you have or data that you're gathering in future is held in a secure format. Data governance is closely tied to accountability, and organisations need to put good governance in place. Specifically required within GDPR are that all public bodies must appoint a DPO, a data protection officer, as do organisations processing large amounts of sensitive personal data and organisations whose core activities is systematic monitoring of data subjects. This has resulted in a shortage of DPOs across organisations, and as such you may wish to consider which staff within your organisation may be suitable for taking on this role and provide them with the adequate training. I would highly recommend the GDPR practitioner qualification with IT governance as something to look at, and that's what we've put Michael, who is our GDPR practitioner, through, and he makes sure that we are up to date and complying with all guidelines and has become our resident expert. Process is key. Identifying and carrying out DPIAs and establishing data protection by design and fault. Think about how you could meaningfully keep records and how you build up a single view of all interactions with the data subject. There is a high risk of data subjects' rights. GDPR requires maintaining DPIAs to be carried out. Consider whether current marketing and recruitment marketing activities are designed with data subjects' rights in mind, and how you collect that data. Devise workable policies and procedures to govern how data is processed, and put processes in place to ensure that records can be maintained accurately. So whether using manual or automated systems, it's important that data can be updated and deleted and maintained and kept up to date. In terms of consent, it must be freely given, specific, informed and unambiguous. In general, you have to have data subjects consent to process their data, and while there are specific circumstances where consent is not strictly necessary, these generally revolve around legal requirements such as compliance with another law or protected data subjects' rights. The conditions for consent are outlined across here in the slide. As I said, must be freely given, specific, informed and unambiguous. It must be consent not presumed to be freely given if it does not allow separate consent to be given to a different person and data processing operations. The controller must be able to demonstrate that the data subject has consented to processing, and data subjects have the right to withdraw consent at any time. So in terms of processing, multiple purpose consent should be given for each of them. Companies should consider how to record consent for each purpose. And so if you're looking to maintain information within the recruitment process and you've got different steps of processes or different people looking at that information, you must look to see how you can garner consent for that information to be shared across your organisation and who ultimately holds and controls that data. Individuals should be able to withdraw consent easily as it has been given. So if consent is given by ticking a box on a landing page or an applicant tracking system, it should be able to be removed via similar means or updating preferences either on a landing page or given by an SMS or sent by email. Specific rules apply to children, e.g. to verify age and seek parental consent. So generally within recruitment that's not going to play a case because most people will be hiring people above the age of 16. But if you are looking to hire underage minors, perhaps in seasonal jobs, if you're hiring 14, 15-year-olds, then you need to look to those specific rules and contact the DPO about what rules you need to garner from them and how you get parental consent for those people to actually work for you. Specific rules apply to processing restricted data, and that can be found in Article 9. So that's in relation to restricted data about biometrics, etc. So if you are looking to take medical details, review Article 9 for more information on that. Consent should not be considered freely given if the data subject has no genuine or free choice. So it's important to note that pre-ticked boxes on forms do not constitute consent. Which is why you'll notice that if you're ever filling out a lot of forms, companies that have become GDPR ready, they're now making you tick boxes as opposed to before for marketing information. A lot of those boxes would have been pre-ticked. It's the same with regards to if you're actually looking to add candidates to candidate pools for further marketing information and to be updated about any information about new vacancies that you have. You must get them to tick a box rather than have a box pre-ticked for the consent to be considered valid. And documentation of consent is crucial, and that can be documentation on an online basis or on a manual basis. Privacy notices are an important and necessary way of being transparent and telling data subjects, the candidates, what you're doing with their information. You should have a clear privacy notice and make people aware of it on your careers website and on other recruitment marketing campaigns such as landing pages, etc. And it should tell people what information is being collected, who is collecting it, how it is collected, why it is collected and how it will be used, and who it will be shared with. More information on privacy notices and transparency can be found on the ICO website. And it details exactly what you can use. So a lot of the information that you may need in relation to what to put into your privacy note and where to have those links to privacy notes can be found by going to the ICO website, and a lot of their information is free and available to download. So it's really worth getting somebody to take a look at that for your own details. The link is there if you wanted to take a quick screen grab. I'll freeze here for a few seconds and you're by all means you can take a screen grab of that link with regards to privacy notices and transparency. Cookies is something that we all, whether it's a bugbear or whether it's something we've become used to. It used to be people got annoyed by cookies, but now it's just across organisations and across websites. And sites will need an always available opt-out even after getting valid consent. There must be a route for people to change their mind. So if accepting cookies is as easy as clicking a link on a landing page, then withdrawal for consent must be just as simple. Once fair notice is given, continuing to browse can, in most circumstances, be considered valid consent via affirmative action, and the GDPR does not specifically change legislation around cookies, but reinforces the current e-privacy legislation. It is important to have a clear cookie policy and monitor outputs and opt-outs and do not track requests. So again, just work with your IT team in terms of what you have on your current website and how that transpires. If you have a separate careers website, a lot of organisations will have their careers page hosted by an outside body, by an ATS such as Landed, so it's important to make sure that the privacy notes are held within on that page as well, and that it corresponds with your standing privacy legislation. So this means granular level controls and separate consents for tracking and analytics, for example. So for a good example of how cookies can work is many businesses are now updating their cookie policies and acceptance process to ensure that they're fully compliant with that legislation, such as EasyJet. It used to be that it would be a bar across the top that you could simply ignore and carry on and put in your personal data to make a booking or to do a search, etc. But now, if you are looking to do that, you'll see that the background page where you're doing your search for your flight will grey out, and you have to actually accept the cookie policy and physically accept that policy before you're allowed to go in and put in your information and request that flight. And this is a really good example of how to do it. So if you are collecting candidates' information, then it's important to have a pop-up that will appear that they can't ignore, and so that they can actually then say, yes, I accept your privacy information and I accept your access to the cookies. And that can be done at the beginning whenever they enter your careers website. In terms of data breaches, in a world of increasing cyber attacks, it is inevitable that breaches will happen, and the mere fact that a breach has occurred does not necessarily mean that companies will be punished. The ICO will look at how companies have handled the breach in the first instance. Did they report the breach within the first 72 hours? Were adequate processes put in place to reduce the risk of infringement of data subjects' rights, and was the data encrypted or pseudonymized? Was there a risk to be identified individuals being informed of the breach? So if you have had a breach and there's potential that candidates' information may have been identified, then it's important that you notify those individuals to say that you've had that breach and that you're putting all steps in place to protect their data. Sanctions for failure to comply to this are going to be quite steep. So it's important, as I say, having a breach isn't going to mean that you're going to be punished. It's how you handle the breach and what you do after it's happened. So failure to comply with GDPR are extremely punitive, and companies should be aware of them. Article 83 of GDPR states that fines will be effective, proportionate, dissuasive, and can be imposed in addition to or instead of corrective powers of the ICO. These correct powers include things like issuing warnings, reprimands, and ordering companies to comply with data subjects' requests. As a small company, if you are a small company or even a mid-sized company or a large company, you don't want to be one of the first companies to be reprimanded by the ICO. The ICO, it is believed, will likely make an example of early offenders, so it's important to take the necessary steps now to ensure that you have adequate controls and processes in place to ensure that you are compliant. The clock is ticking. It's less than 4 months until regulation has come into force, and we have certainly seen an uptake in the last 3 to 4 months of people interested not only in this webinar but in the ebook that we send out. So people are obviously scrabbling to make sure that they have all bases covered. Data protection is by design a key, and it's something that you need to really take seriously. It's important that you're accountable and that you review the use of consent. Update privacy notices and cookie policies, and opportunity as to what you do with any threats. So it's important to protect your business. So don't wait until May. It's important that you are compliant before May, because on the 25th of May it becomes regulation. So use these last few months to put in place processes to make sure that any data that you're holding you have that consent, and that the information is easily accessible and it is transferable. In relation to recruitment, conduct an internal audit into how you collect and collate applicant information. How is this information stored? Where is it stored? And how long is it stored for? Even everyday simple processes such as emailing applicant CVs to another hiring managers. This is something that is a potential breach. If you're sending a candidate CV from one manager to another or one colleague to another, is it being done within a secure email environment? Is that email only accessible from secure IPs and computers within the organisation? Are you sending CVs to personal email addresses? And if so, is that then being held on a personal computer? Is that computer encrypted so that if somebody does break into that computer, can they access that personal information? So it's really important that you look at how and where you share candidate information in the recruitment process. And one of the best ways to do that is to look to putting in an applicant tracking system and sharing candidate information within an applicant tracking system, rather than sharing it via emails, printing off CVs and leaving them lying around organisations. So have a good audit of how you do your actual recruitment process, and look to see what information is there that is personal information and is generally the CV in the application form, and how can we store that and secure that information. What happens to candidates' interview notes at the end of an interview? So if you've got a panel of recruiters or managers doing an interview, they're obviously writing down information that's personal data relating to that candidate, and the candidate could obviously request that information any time. Where are those notes stored? Are they just stored in somebody's drawer? Are they then uploaded onto a system and stored in an area where it can be secured, and then the written notes destroyed? So look at what happens to interview notes within your organisation. Now, by all means, what we're not saying is you have to go out and buy software to do this. If you have a good controlled measure and process in place, it can still be done on a manual basis, but it must become a process that all interview notes are collected and collated after interview, and that they're stored in one secure environment, and that they're not left lying around for other people to see that information. Data protection by design is essential to ensuring that you are prepared, and this means looking at what systems you have in place to handle data. How can your current systems be modified to ensure that you have a full picture of all interactions with data subjects? Do you have a single view of all touch points in terms of, can you log into a system and see every call that you've made with that candidate, every conversation that's been recorded, and every interview and every access of notes for that whole recruitment process? And that's specifically what we're looking at. As mentioned previously, you must be able to prove that you've put measures in place to ensure that the rights of data subjects are protected. Consent cannot be relied upon. However, you must ensure that data subjects have freely given consent and have measures in place for removal of specific consent. Transparency is also a key element of GDPR. You should update your privacy notes, cookie policies, as I've said, to ensure that they are clear, concise, and accurately reflect how data is collected and used. Take steps to ensure that all data processing from a marketing and recruitment marketing perspective is open and transparent. And this new regulation can be an opportunity for yourself as a business to show consumers that you're aware of their rights, and that you will look after, or candidates even, and that you will look after their information, and that you will interact with them in a way that is protecting their data. The fines, as I've said before, are significant, so you don't want to be caught out, and really do take the steps over the next few months to ensure you're compliant by May 25th. As I said before, the legislation is coming regardless of Brexit, and it's important that you get to grips with it now. A report out recently by the IT governance showed that 68% of organisations have not yet updated the process to comply with GDPR, so there's going to be a lot of work done over this over the next few months. And we are well on our way to it becoming legislation. So those that have sat, like everything, like people sitting doing their tax returns today, leaving it to the last minute, you really do only have 4 months to go. So it's important that you get on top of this now. So how can we help? What we can do is bring all your recruitment marketing and applicant tracking into one centralised and easy to find dashboard. So basically, what we try to do is bring your recruitment marketing and getting the permission of the candidates when they're applying for the jobs, and then the applicant tracking activities under one single dashboard. So you have that one central repository of data for subjects, which makes it easier for you to maintain accurate records and to maintain transparency. If you're running email campaigns, job board adverts, social campaigns, PPC adverts, etc., all the data is coming back to those campaigns, can be collected in one place, and all consent can also be collected and stored in one place as well. It will be much easier to respond to data subjects access requests and to remove data from your systems when they are no longer appropriate or lawful to retain. And these are key elements of GDPR. If you're working on multiple systems, such as an email provider, and CRM, an ATS, a social media management platform, you will find it difficult to accurately maintain all databases and remove data easily, as you will have to do it across multiple systems, and you will struggle to get that single customer viewpoint which tracks all the different touch points. The Landa platform ensures that you obtain permission from every applicant who engages with your job advert, including privacy policies, cookies, pop-ups, and terms and conditions. By having a set of standard templates, you can be sure that all of your recruitment marketing campaigns have transparency notices in place, and when data subjects interact with your marketing campaigns, you can tie this all back to that policy that was in place at the time, ensuring that you have a full audit trail on consent to provide to the GDPR ICO monitors. With single applicant view, you can track every interaction with data subjects across campaigns and channels. You can monitor the consent status of each individual, covering SMS consent, email consent, mail consent, telephone consent, consent to receive cookies, and consent in respect of profiling candidates for future roles. In addition, you can tie each element of consent back to the time of collection and the campaign used and the policies in place at that time. Our landed recruiters and team of professionals are on hand to assist all our clients with any aspects of campaign setup and management. And this can include guidance and assistance on building those digital recruiting campaigns and review the results or create your overall recruitment marketing strategy. We also provide ongoing advice around ensuring that you've got compliance with GDPR, and we are taking GDPR extremely seriously as an organisation and within our software, and we are actively training staff in all areas of this so that they can assist our clients with maintaining that compliance. Our solutions start from £499 a month, where we provide you with a complete software suite of tools to manage your entire recruitment marketing activities, including full online applicant tracking, screening, dedicated support per month, and ensure that your campaigns are both effective and compliant, and most importantly, ensure that you hire the best person for your company, because we need to recognise that whilst these guidelines are in place, the goal ultimately within recruitment has to be the same, that you're looking to hire people that are right for your organisation. In addition to that, we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try our system out for a month, and at the end of that period, if you don't wish to continue, we'll offer you a full refund. And we do this because we're confident that once a client comes on board, they will quickly see the value of the platform and how they can access candidates and how importantly they can ensure that they're compliant with all of GDPR guidelines. If you're interested in taking a look at our software, by all means, I'm not going to go into it in detail here today, but we can organise a demo of the platform so you can see specifically how we deal with things like gathering candidates permission whenever they're applying through our third-party system, and how you can ensure that all of their data is held in a secure environment, so we can do that on a one-to-one schedule. But for now, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put your mic on and ask me anything. There is a copy of this. I have recorded this session, so if you've missed the beginning of it, you've come in late, or simply you want to refer it and share it with colleagues later, by all means drop me an email to request a copy of the recording once we get it uploaded onto our software. But for now, yes, any questions, I'm happy to answer anything that you may want to ask. Okay, I've obviously covered everything sufficiently, so that pretty much brings the end to today's session. Hopefully you have found it useful, that there has been some nuggets in there. We do appreciate GDPR. It is a bit of a minefield, and it's one of those regulations that people, I think, have maybe put to the back burner, and now it's coming upon them. But in terms of GDPR, it really is putting in place processes and procedures and knowing where your information is stored, that you've got that consent from candidates, and that you can easily access the information to ensure, to prove that you've been given consent to view that information and who you're going to share it with. And then it's about how you share it and who you share it with in your organisation. And it's making sure that CVs aren't left lying around on desks, and that everybody in your organisation is aware that candidate information and CVs do fall under GDPR. So it's just taking that top-down approach. If you want to get more information on that, we put regular guidelines out on our social media, so you can get that on either Twitter, Facebook, or on LinkedIn. By all means, feel free to follow us. We have blogs that go out quite regularly on this, and like I say, it's something that we take seriously. But for now, just want to thank you all very much for your time today. Hopefully you find it quite useful. And our next session next Wednesday is focusing very much on recruitment marketing and social media, and how you can take steps to ensure that you're getting the right people. So feel free to join us next Wednesday at 2 o'clock if you can. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.